A reading from Beachtown. It had not been easy to convince Rona, her assistant, that learning to surf was a good idea. Kira had sworn Rona to secrecy, for if Jonah, Kira's manager, or Kira's mother knew that she was going out in the ocean on what Rona described as a toothpick, they would appear in Ocean Beach as fast as a Learjet could carry them. Kira agreed to meet the instructor, Flynn, later that day at the Ocean Beach surf shop. When she arrived, Flynn was still out at another lesson, and she was greeted by Phil. He had to be at least 70, but she could tell he was in better shape than any man of comparable age that she knew. His wetsuit, peeled halfway down his body, revealed snow-white hair on his chest and rippling muscles free of fat. He definitely was an advertisement on the benefits of surfing. Howdy! He grinned, and she was sure he had no problem finding dates with younger women. Is this your first time? Yes, she said nervously. I've always wanted to try it, but I've never had the chance. He smiled with a full respect and admiration for the sport. You're going to love it, I promise. And you've got a great teacher in Flynn. Why don't I get you set up with a wetsuit while you wait? She should be back in a few minutes. Kira nodded, and they found a wetsuit with a royal blue trim. She headed off to a dressing room, noticing that Flynn was almost 20 minutes late. She jumped when the door slammed shut, followed by Flynn bellowing at the top of her lungs. I can't believe that asshole. He shows up drunk and expects me to teach him to surf, and then he threatens me with a lawsuit for breach of promise. What the hell is that? Kira stepped out from the dressing room while Flynn continued to rant, clearly unaware that Kira was behind her. Phil held up a finger several times to silence her, but she ignored him and continued to purge her anger. I can't stand stuck-up rich people. They are the absolute worst. The asshole shows up in a Speedo. A Speedo! Does this asshole have a name? Phil managed to ask when she took a breath. Sanford something. What kind of a bullshit name is that? An invented one, Kira said. Flynn whirled around and her face turned crimson. His real name is Horace Corville, Kira continued. He's my co-star, and you're absolutely right. He is a total asshole. Frankly, though, I think you made the wrong decision. Flynn raised an eyebrow in question. I think that a much better choice would have been to let his ass drown out in the water. They laughed with her, and Flynn's anger dissipated quickly. They loaded Kira's surfboard onto Flynn's VW bus and hopped in the front. The smell of wet dog assaulted Kira's senses, and she perched her feet upon a stack of surfing magazines that littered the passenger floor. Flynn threw a few empty food containers into the back before she put the bus in gear. I'm sorry the place is such a mess, she said. Kira shrugged, her attention focused on Flynn's lean body. The woman possessed a natural ease in her demeanor, and she could see the shadow of laugh lines around the corners of her mouth. She gazed at her while Flynn watched the traffic on Newport Boulevard. When Flynn applied some lip balm, Kira fantasized about kissing her. She took a deep breath and turned her head away, just in time to catch a glimpse of the ocean. You're sure this is safe? Flynn laughed. Surfing? Surfing is amazing. I've done it almost all my life. I hear you're studying to be a veterinarian. Yeah, I've got a year left. Speaking of animals, are you okay with dogs? Yes, I love dogs. I haven't ever owned one because my mother doesn't like them, but I've enjoyed everybody else's dogs very much. Good, Flynn said, turning down a side street. I need to make a few stops, if that's okay. I mean, if you're not in a hurry or anything. She immediately warmed to the idea of spending more time with Flynn than the allotted hour for a surfing lesson. Sure. Flynn maneuvered onto the residential streets of Ocean Beach, and Kira admired the historic bungalows of the area. They pulled in front of a brick building, the words Ocean Beach Veterinary Clinic painted on the window in gold. Is this where you work? Flynn nodded. Yeah, I wanted to pick up some hitchhikers. Come on. A young woman with stringy blonde hair sat at the desk of the clinic, and Kira noticed her striking brown eyes were hidden behind some oversized glasses. When the woman saw Flynn, her entire face smiled. Someone has a case of puppy love, Kira thought. Hi, Flynn. Hi, Amber. This is Kira. In the few seconds it took for Amber's head to swivel 3 inches and acknowledge Kira, her expression froze like ice, and she glared at her. Flynn didn't notice, her attention directed at the charts piled on the counter. Did Mrs. Ormsby bring in radar today? Yes, Amber said, her sub-zero stare still focused on Kira. Kira turned away and busied herself at the magazine rack, hoping they would leave soon. I'll be back in a sec, Flynn said, and headed into the back. You'll just break her heart. Realizing that Amber was addressing her, Kira turned to the reception desk. Sorry? I've read about you in the magazines. I know what they say. I doubt if 50% of it is true. That still leaves the other 50%. You stay away from Flynn, Amber said. I know you're a heartbreaker. You stomped all over poor Jason Anthony's heart. Kira rolled her eyes, remembering the scandal surrounding her reported love affair with Jason, another gay actor. Jonah had staged the whole romance and breakup to lift their careers. He was just a friend, Kira said, and I don't date women, so you don't have to worry. Sure, Amber said, her mouth forming a knowing smile. I can tell by the way you look at her. She tried to hide her surprise, but Amber's grin widened. Perhaps Flynn was attractive, but Kira needed to put her emotions in check. Much to her relief, Flynn emerged from the back room, 3 leashes in her hands. Preceding her were an Irish setter, a golden retriever, and a German shepherd. She reflexively took a step back at the size of the pack. Flynn must have noticed her hesitancy and ordered the dogs to sit. They willingly obliged and stared at Flynn. She stepped in front of the trio and clapped her hands. Each dog immediately raised his right paw for her to shake, which she did. Kira Drake, I would like you to meet Quincy, Lady, and Tramp. At the mention of their names, all 3 tails wagged in unison. Are they coming with us? If it's okay with you. Absolutely. Flynn grabbed the leashes again and headed for the door. See you later, Amber. Bye, Flynn, she answered with great affection. When Kira turned to say goodbye, the woman narrowed her eyes and Kira hustled out to the bus, quickly returning to her seat before Amber could give chase and bite her ankle. The dogs piled in the back, and Flynn cruised down Newport Avenue, stopping in front of the local market. The small store bustled with shoppers and a few tourists buying goodies for the beach. They strolled past a magazine rack on their way to the counter. Kira found her face on 3 covers, one of which depicted her in a slinky top and shorts outfit. Her lips puckered, offering the readers a sexy kiss. She'd hated that shoot, but Jonah had insisted. Now, this is sexy. Flynn grabbed the magazine and held it out. Kira's face burned, and she pulled it from Flynn's hands, placing it back on the rack. Stop, she said, although she was secretly pleased that Flynn had noticed. At the counter, Flynn greeted a portly gray-haired lady perched on a stool. She was at least 80, and Kira was rather certain the woman was blind. Next to her was a sign that read, Shoplifters will be beaten. Hi, G-Mum, Flynn said. Flynn, it's a beautiful day, isn't it? Like Mo, her Irish brogue was rich. Now, who's your friend, me lass? Kira looked at Flynn, surprised. G-Mum, this is Kira Drake. She's in the movie. Kira, this is my grandmother, Eileen McFadden. Kira Drake, it's a pleasure. G-Mum stuck out her hand precisely toward Kira, and she shook it over the counter. I owe you a debt of thanks. Every time you're on the cover of one of these magazines, I make a lot of money. You're very popular. That's nice of you to say. Kira noticed that G-Mum gazed upward, and her head continually moved to the left and right as she assessed her surroundings. Now, my darlings, I do need you to step to the side. Flynn grabbed Kira and pulled her against the wall. In the next second, Eileen McFadden whipped a long wooden bat out from under the counter and slammed it against the chip display. The sound was deafening as the metal rack clattered to the floor and everyone in the store froze. Damn filthy thief, you get the hell out of my store before I whack you. Kira's jaw dropped in horror, but she noticed a teenager remove a bag of sunflower seeds from his pocket and place them carefully back in the appropriate box before running out the front door. G-Mum sighed and replaced the bat. Flynn, be a love and give me a hand. Flynn righted the chip display, and Kira asked, fascinated, How did you know? G-Mum chuckled heartily. Oh, Kira, me darling, the senses are a wonderful thing. You lose one and the others know. They help each other. That young bugger crinkled the bag before he put it in his pocket, and I heard the change jangling. He had the money, but he just didn't want to pay for it. No good little runt. And I know you're standing just to Flynn's right because your perfume is mixing together with her natural sea smell. And by the way, whatever it is, it's a lovely scent on you, darling. That's amazing, Mrs. McFadden. Gee, Mum, I thought I'd take Zipper out with us today, Flynn said. He'd love it. The poor thing's been cooped up all week. Flynn squeezed behind the counter and began slapping her thighs. Come on, Zip. Let's go. Come on. Flynn waited until a slow-moving basset hound crawled out. The dog's belly scraped the ground as he waddled around the counter and headed for the door. No leash necessary. Kira repressed a laugh, unsure whether G-Mum would find it funny. They said their goodbyes, and only when the bus was a block down the road did she burst out laughing. I'm not sure if Zipper is the best name for that dog. He moved a lot faster when he was younger, Flynn said, but it is rather ironic now. Kira glanced into the back. All 4 dogs lounged about the floor, Zipper lying on top of Tramp. Flynn pulled up in front of a large 2-story Spanish bungalow. Last stop. This is my house. She gazed up at the beautiful home. You live here? Uh-huh. I'll be right back. Flynn ran inside and within seconds returned with a white terrier puppy trailing behind her. He willingly hopped inside and stared at Kira. Who's this? This is Rufus. He was left on the doorstep of the clinic a few weeks ago. I just couldn't take him to the pound. Certainly not. He's absolutely adorable. You're a great dog, Rufus. Hearing his name, Rufus assumed Kira was his new best friend and climbed into her lap. His eyes focused on the road ahead as though he were Flynn's navigator. They drove toward the shore, and Kira asked Flynn questions about Ocean Beach and noticed the passion with which Flynn described her town. Kira found herself lost in Flynn's life, happy to be the listener for once, rather than the subject of the conversation. She didn't even realize they had arrived at the beach until Flynn parked the bus and turned to stare at her. Are you ready? Flynn gave her arm a squeeze. The touch penetrated the wetsuit and sent a tingle through her body. I think so. They unloaded the gear and trudged up the sand and over a dune. Kira had not visited the ocean since her childhood, when her parents took her to the Devon seaside each year for holiday. Those trips were pleasant memories, and she had always sworn she would return for a vacation, but she had never found the time, even during her trips to LA for various movies. This was her first up-close view of the Pacific Ocean, and she was overwhelmed by the sound and sight of the waves spilling onto the shore, the immensity of the place a reminder that she was standing on the edge of the North American continent. Enjoying the water were surfers and, to her surprise, dogs. Flynn removed the leashes, and all of the dogs immediately bounded down the dune and ran right into the ocean, Zipper trailing behind. At one point, his short body sank into the sand, and Flynn had to rescue him. But once he made his way to the shore, he seemed to enjoy letting the water roll over his paws. Kira laughed as the dogs frolicked in the waves, chased their tails, and fetched toys thrown by several owners. She noticed a group of dogs huddled around a woman with a tennis ball. When she threw it back into the water, the dogs bolted after it, including Rufus, who couldn't keep up with dogs that were 4 times his size. A whippet seized the ball from the surf and charged up the shore. The other dogs chased after him, clearly not caring that they had no chance of catching this canine bullet. Curious, she turned to Flynn quizzically. What is this place? Dog Beach, of course. Kira smiled. Of course. I picked the spot because there aren't a lot of tourists. Most of the people here are locals and they won't bother you. What, Ocean Beach citizens don't go to movies? Oh, they go to movies and they know who you are, but they just don't care. I see. Kira's ego deflated at the comment. Flynn touched her shoulder. Look, it's not that they don't care about your work. They just don't get caught up in all the celebrity stuff. Besides, nobody wants to swim with dogs, so we usually just get a handful of surfers and the waves are easy here. Her gaze lingered on Flynn's hand until she pulled away and started toward the shore. They found a spot and sat down in front of the ocean. Flynn clapped her hands and said, Okay, so the first part of our lesson today is to study the water and the other surfers. Watch where the water breaks. After a while, you start to get a feeling about where to be. See, right now everyone is out pretty far, and that means that there are some great sets coming. As if Flynn were a prophet, an enormous wave formed, a tube, as Flynn called it, much to the delight of the surfers who rode it until it disintegrated. Flynn gave several pointers, and Kira tried to pay attention to the techniques Flynn was describing, but her interest in surfing was competing against her attraction to Flynn, which was growing at breakneck speed. After they studied the surfers, Flynn dropped their boards on the sand. You need to practice standing on the shore before you try it in the water. Go ahead and lie down like you're ready to catch a wave. She hesitantly stretched out on the board and waited for her directions. Now, you're going to jump up, but you need to make sure that your feet land in the right place. You want your back foot by the tail, and you want your front foot near the middle of the board. Does it matter whether it's my left or right in the back? No, it's up to you, whatever feels comfortable. Go ahead and give it a try. Jump up and work for a position. Ready? Uh-huh. 1, 2, 3. She jumped up, her feet in a twisted knot. Flynn stifled a laugh as Kira worked to keep her balance. Stop it, or I will push you in the ocean. Flynn held up her hands in surrender. Okay, let's try again. They practiced several times, and once Kira could easily pull her body up into a standing position, Flynn suggested they paddle out so she could attempt to surf. She looked at the few surfers already in the water, wondering how many she would jeopardize with her novice surfboarding. She pictured the end of a board protruding from a skull, or worse, drowning someone when she ran into him. That would not make for good press, and Jonah really would kill her. Before she could protest, Flynn handed her the board. They paddled out together and faced several sets of waves. While she only managed to stand once, she calculated she was upright for almost a tenth of a second. Just as her body recognized exhaustion from the constant battle with the water, Flynn motioned them in. You looked like you were fading, Flynn said. Kira nodded, realizing she must appear absolutely hideous, not the impression she wanted to leave with Flynn. They sat on the shore for a few minutes while she caught her breath. I haven't had this much fun in, forever. It's the best thing in the world, and you did great. Kira blushed. You're being kind. I could barely get up. That will come in time. Don't worry about it. So you don't think I'm hopeless as a surfer? She fished for a compliment, praying that Flynn saw some promise in her surfing ability. No way, you've got great potential. They packed up, and Flynn drove her to the hotel. Rufus, dirty, smelly, and wet, insisted on sitting in Kira's lap again, which was just fine with her. He really likes you, Flynn said. He's selective about who he covers in seawater and sand. She held his face between her hands. I'm honored, Rufus, he responded by licking her on the lips. Surprised, she laughed and hugged him tighter. Rufus, darling, that was the best kiss I've had in a long time. She looked over at Flynn, who was watching with a mysterious grin on her face. What? Nothing. She opened the door to leave and thought of what she could say. I had a lovely time. Thanks for the lesson. Flynn shrugged. No problem. I'm really sorry about Sanford and the way he spoke to you. Flynn looked puzzled and scratched her head. Why would you be sorry? You didn't pour the booze down his throat, did you? Of course not. Flynn leaned across their seat until they were only inches apart. Don't apologize for him. Every person is responsible for his or her own actions. He was an ass today, and you, Miss Drake, were excellent company, and a pretty good surfer, too. Kira's throat went dry, and she was unsure if the cause was the compliment or Flynn's nearness. Please, call me Kira. Can I have another lesson tomorrow? I think I can squeeze you in, Kira.